Next, I'd like to introduce our agronomy and production panel. And I'll read your bio, and then if you guys would come up while I'm doing that, we'll get started. Please don't hesitate, all y'all in the back. Front row is ready and willing there. Dr. Brent Bean serves as Director of Agronomy for the United Sorghum Checkoff Program, where he has worked since 2015 to advance agronomic practices and research for sorghum producers. Before joining the Checkoff, he was Director of Agronomy for Next Step, leading efforts to develop best management practices for sweet and biomass sorghum. Earlier in his career, Bean worked as an agronomist with Texas A&M AgriLife Research and Extension in the Texas Panhandle, where he focused on sorghum, corn, and wheat production systems. He earned his bachelor's and master's degree in crop science from Texas Tech University and a doctorate in weed science from the University of Nebraska. Welcome, Dr. Bean. Dr. Sara Sexton-Bowser is Managing Director of the Center for Sorghum Improvement at Kansas State University. The center connects research and innovation with the practical needs of farmers and end users to advance sorghum productivity and profitability. Sexton-Bowser previously worked with agribusiness trade associations, including the United Sorghum Checkoff and National Sorghum Producers. She also farms alongside her husband, raising diversified grains and forages and operating a cow-calf herd. She earned her doctorate from Kansas State University, where her research focused on the water-limited yield potential of sorghum. Welcome. And our last panel person is Dr. James Schnable. He is the Nebraska Corn Checkoff Presidential Chair at the University of Nebraska, specializing in corn and sorghum breeding. He leads a research group focused on improving crop quality and agronomic properties using genomic, phenomic, and machine learning technologies. Dr. Schnable has raised over $27 million in funding for research and established multiple companies in bioinformatics and precision agriculture. He previously worked at X, a division of Google, before returning to the University of Nebraska. His research has contributed to significant advancements in climate-resilient ag. His work earned him the National Academy of Sciences Prize in Food and Agriculture Sciences for pioneering breakthroughs in plant genomics and quantitative genetics that are reshaping modern ag. Let's take a moment to congratulate him and welcome all of our panelists. I don't know if I'm supposed to join, but I'm going to. It feels better. But I have to spread out a little bit. So if anybody has ever had to be part of a panel or to introduce a panel that is so talented and loaded as this one is, if you hear me getting a little nervous, it's because there's so much to cover. So let's get on with this. What I'd like to do with all of you is to go through and have you tell us from a 10,000-foot view what's on top of your piles right now. Dr. Schnable, would you kick it off? Very bottom, maybe, if it's not on. There we go.
Okay, is that on?
Yeah,
perfect. All right, so the 10,000-point view, the thing that I am really excited about today is if we look at breeding in sorghum, one of the things, we don't see quite the same level of increase that we've seen in corn. Some of that is likely due to the germplasm base. So we're working on bringing in more diversity, doing the pre-breeding work to have that at a level where it can actually move into breeding programs, move into new hybrids. As we think about how that actually works, we're starting to actually see good success with genome editing in sorghum and how we can do a more rapid job of leveraging a lot of the really powerful genetic resources in the USDA that are from other parts of the world are not at all adapted to Nebraska. I grow these here in Lincoln. If you ever want to come visit my field, it looks fascinating, but it looks terrible. It is not anything, So I'm really excited about how we're going to start integrating that into the breeding program.
I think it's fabulous because I know we're going to get into some of the hybrids and the fancier words for that. Sarah, would you please?
Well, thank you, Tracy, and thanks for your work and leadership. It's equally a little bit nerve-wracking to be challenged by your question because you demonstrate such an intentional leadership on behalf of the industry. Before I get into the present 10,000-foot view, I want to speak a little bit to the long-term 10,000-foot view, especially for the farmer leaders and industry stakeholders in the crowd. It's important to differentiate our role in sorghum relative to some of the other crops within your rotation. Let it be known that you have an outsized role in advancing your crop. Sorghum is relatively 1/15 the size of some of the other larger commodity crops that you grow on your farming operation. And so that puts you in a place to be at the lead of prioritizing, because you're not going to get everything, so you need to first prioritize what do you need at the farm gate. And then secondarily, devising strategies that overcome some of those first cost of resource investment or fixed costs that you have in bringing a new trait to technology. What that also does is it gives those that work on behalf of you, your partners, those at the land grant institutions, an opportunity to also play an outsized role in your crop. But to do that, we have to do it in a way that's pretty clever and crafted, in that we're not duplicating the capacities of the industry, because we want to be additive. We don't want to be duplicative. And so Dr. Schnable just mentioned, pre-breeding. That's, there's a lot of diversity within sorghum, but it's not innately an efficient use of industry's resource to take some of that wrangly stuff that you're kind of like, is it sorghum, is it not? And bring it into something that you would consider an elite background, or it can start being leveraged intentionally. At the present point, the 10,000-foot view of today that I'm really excited about, just a few years ago, we started a number of partnerships that are led with the Center for Sorghum Improvement. The center has farmer leadership, checkoff leadership, leadership at state organization level, along with stakeholders that come alongside the table and say, we know great things are happening in the public space. We know there's clear needs in the industry. How can we bridge this gap and be a part of devising those clever strategies and solutions? A lot of it has been based around identifying native diversity within the crop for specific traits and bringing trait technology into bear. And where we are today is not just having these few one-offs that have been exciting and certainly allowed for some key marketing of traits in the seed bag. Sugarcane aphid really kicked that off, and we're having subsequent translation of those traits. But today, we're stepping back and we're saying, okay, we can do this. That's great. Can we do it better? Can we scale better? How can we build this into a culture of translation? So we have a project presently where we're working with commercial-facing breeding programs. We have the majority of all sorghum commercial-facing breeding programs, and we've built trust based on our prior relationships where they're contributing germplasm, where we can characterize their germplasm and know what are their height controls, what are their maturity controls, some of the secret and their secret sauce that really needs to be appreciated for rapid trait translation. And we're able to start to build more sophisticated and scaled processes to make the relationships that we have in place ready to more easily uptake some of those great outcomes that we see from the public sector.
Fantastic. Thank you for acknowledging the producers and how important it is that we stay invested in what all of you are doing. Dr. Bean, your 10,000-foot view.
Okay, thanks. Always enjoy coming back to Nebraska. My 3.5 years at the University of Nebraska were some of the best days, and I always enjoy coming back to Nebraska. What's most on my mind right now? One, I do want to say, from a checkoff standpoint, and as the Director of Agronomy, we probably have about 25 or so ongoing agronomy crop improvement projects that we're funding. If you have an interest in any of those, talk to me or any of the board members, and we'll be glad to let you know what some of those are. You can read about them, what we're doing. Most immediate, what's kind of on my mind, again, kind of being an old weed scientist, something that's kind of dear to my heart that we're working on right now that's very current, is a couple of products that we're trying to get labeled for grain sorghum. One of those being a herbicide called Loyant that's used in rice, which obviously none of you probably grow rice. But this product has been around for a long time. I had a guy from Arkansas call me about 3 or 4 years ago and said, hey, have you ever used this product in sorghum? I said, nope, in fact, never even heard of it. He said, works great. I said, really? So we did some testing. Sure enough, it does do a good job. This is on broadleaf weed controls, particularly palmer amaranth or, I think, tall water hemp. So we started doing some trials, and sure enough, looks really promising from that standpoint. It's a Corteva product. Visiting with the Corteva people, they very much are interested in labeling this, and I think it could happen relatively soon, surprisingly. We're going to do some further testing this summer. It'll actually be tested at Clay Center. Amit will be doing a study for us. So it'll be one of the locations. So really looking forward to finishing that project up and hopefully getting a new product that sorghum growers can use. The second product, mesotrione, most of you are probably familiar with, Callisto, used in corn. It's also used in sorghum as a premix of Lumax and Lexar and some others. That product has never been labeled on forage sorghum. And there's no good reason for that. And so we're working on that. We're going to be doing some trials this year to bring to Syngenta that has also told us, yep, you do the work, we'll get it on the label. So that's something we're working on. We're also helping to fund, along with the Nebraska board, some work that Nicholas is doing here in Nebraska. Had a chance to look at his slides last night for the first time, and very impressed with some of that work. And so that's also kind of on my mind. So I'm very much looking forward to his talk later on this afternoon.
Oh, that's fantastic. You mentioned about 25 projects, and are they all available to review on the website? The checkoff. I can't
Good
remember.
question. Not really on our website.
But
probably ought to
accessible.
consider. There's some that are,
Yeah.
but if you want to take a look at all of them, contact me. I'll be glad to
Can you
provide
just
links to that and get those so you can see them.
rip off a few of them? I'll start you out. We've got some row spacing ones. I know we're doing some work with chinch bugs.
Chinch bugs, which isn't a
some-
big deal probably in Nebraska, but it is
Not
in
yet.
certain areas. Yeah, right now.
Yeah.
But in some areas of Kansas, it's been a big deal. And so that's something that we're working on. Work that Sarah's actually involved in with some others with Innovative Seed Solutions, which is the seed provider for DeKalb and some other companies. But we've got a project with them looking at iron chlorosis tolerance, which is a big deal in sorghum.
Yes, it
Corn is more tolerant to iron chlorosis than sorghum. And so it'd be great to get that trait into sorghum. And that's actually a very difficult trait to work with, but that's a project that is looking promising. If you want more information on that, Sarah can probably tell you more than I can, but from what I've seen, they are making some good progress on that particular project. So there's others I could kind of go on. But.
There's a lot, and there's a lot that, we use what funding we have, and so we always look for more funding, and, that's what the researchers need, is us to fund them. Sarah, we talked about technology. Let's segue into AI and how that technology and big data in agriculture is, in practical terms, how are those tools changing breeding and crop improvement?
You can't turn on a news channel, open up a magazine, and not hear something about just this revolution of AI and, whatever stage or capacity you think about it. It's certainly becoming a tool. And I'd like to take a step back from that. This is math, folks. So if you have grandkids or kids, encourage them to really layer in and lean into their math classes, because we're really looking at relationships, right? And we're aiding and developing new tools that help us understand more nascent relationships at greater complexity. And so first and foremost, in a lot of this application domain within crop improvement, the foundational investments that farmers and others, society has come alongside, just in knowledge about our germplasm, characterization of our germplasm. For instance, the diversity that you look at within is actually housed within USDA. There's a collection, and each major crop maintains a collection. So these foundational resources are pivotal to leveraging and applying AI and data science within crop improvement spaces. And then you think about how is that changing? To look within a search space, if we think about the unique accessions of sorghum, we have over 40,000 unique accessions. There's a lot of untapped potential that really within the capacity of probabilities, even if you funded every single field plot you could in Nebraska to look at this diversity, you just don't have enough power in your observations to look across that diversity and really be able to dissect it. And so we're starting to come up with models and approaches, whether it be the breeding programs looking at genomic prediction. How can they go back and look at the observations of the past, the products of performance, and what they know about not only the environments those plants were grown in, but also the pedigrees and genetics, and use that to make predictions? How can they layer on using other crop modeling tools that help them understand new and unseen environments and genetics to further inform? How do we leverage? We have some fantastic tools, whether it be reference genomes or pan-genome data set that's come out that help us connect, oh, maybe rice had more funding, or maybe corn had more funding, and we clearly know that these genes control these things in these other crops. Can we look within sorghum and see if we have diversity in those same genes and quickly re-leverage known knowledge? And so that just makes it, with the limited dollars that we have, the application in a smart way, leveraging our knowns, is allowing us to much more rapidly and expediently, with greater precision, move through the search space of novel diversity and novel advancement. And genetic gain is really a function of time and precision as you look through germplasm. And this precision factor within that equation is just rapidly exploding with the intentional application of AI and data science. There's unintentional, just like search space random, into the abyss, but the intentional application and design, especially with the fundamental resources that you as farmers, alongside our investments as a society in agriculture research, have established.
Some of the frustrations with research is how long it takes. And so I am hoping that you talk about time and speed, that we're getting away from the sand dropping and moving to more of a digital platform with that. Dr. Schnable, will you tell us, with yours specifically, coming from Google, maybe, how has technology changed the way we study and can make improvements for crops like sorghum?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say that there are two really big changes, one of which has been happening for a long time, and one just in the last couple of years. So the long-term one is that we are getting much better at collecting information about plants. That's the DNA sequence information, but now moving beyond the DNA sequence information to measuring RNA, so measuring how a gene is expressed in an individual sorghum plant. If you grow the same hybrid in different environments, it's going to perform really differently. The DNA is identical, the RNA is not. And the cost of measuring that RNA has come down dramatically to the point where now we can look at hundreds of varieties in each environment and start to build better models of how those individual genes are determining which varieties are going to do well in which environments, which varieties are going to use resources more efficiently. So that's been a long-term trend, but the amount of data that's flowing in gets more and more and more. The other trend comes back to the AI work, and that is when you get these really large data sets. I have new students come into my lab every year, and I have new students leave every year. And when you start out as a new professor, you're really excited because every year your lab gets more capable. You've got smarter and smarter people with more experience, and then they graduate and they go get better jobs. But what we're seeing is that the AI-assisted coding tools are now making it much easier for new people to come in without the same level of sort of detailed quantitative knowledge, work with the really large data sets, work with them efficiently, and start getting answers back about what patterns they see in the data. And this is really powerful because it means we have more people who are thinking creatively about what is in the data, what questions could we be asking, and we're just really speeding up that cycle time of, I have an idea, there's a really big data set, I can pull that in, and I can just say, is there anything to it, in a matter of a few hours instead of a few weeks? And that adds up over the course of a 3 or a 5-year project. We're going to be a lot farther along at the end of a 3-year project today than we would have been 5 years ago.
And some of that is new to sorghum because we're finally having that bank that you referred to there. So unique to that. You talk about expressions, and in my mind I'm picturing it with people.
Yeah.
We can all do great in one environment, but boy, don't put them in that one. And so I'm picturing that. I'm going to have all sorts of little people out in my field this year. Dr. Bean, would you take what both of these brilliant minds have expressed to us and help us understand how we use it on our farms?
Good question. Yeah, certainly, all of the advances in technology have just been amazing over the last really 5-6 years. What does that mean to you? Well, hopefully, I think what it's going to mean is one, just better hybrids more quickly. We talk about how sorghum has lagged behind some of the other major commodities, and it certainly has. But we can now harness the knowledge gained from those other crops, put those into sorghum much more quickly. So at least I'm expecting in the next few years and fairly near term to see some improved hybrids coming out of this effort. So that's one way. Again, going kind of back to weed science, there's all kinds of interesting things going on from weed science on a weed control standpoint that has very little to do with new herbicides. Using basically lasers to find a weed and zap it. If I was a weed scientist starting my career, that is certainly something I'd love to work with. So a lot of things like that are going to make a difference on your farm.
I think that's an inner child coming out right there, actually, or the weed burners. Might be dangerous with that. Dr. Sexton-Bowser, you work closely with farmers across the many different regions. What are some of the most interesting ways you've found that growers are pushing boundaries on sorghum, and in what ways are they doing so?
When we think about farmers managing sorghum intensively in your farm operation, it looks a little bit different than how we may approach some of the other crops. One day, my dad is in central Kansas, and he has a small irrigation plot. And he can do a lot of things in that irrigation plot. He's typically watching like Corn Wars on YouTube, right? These like ridiculous things. But what he really does well, that maybe he doesn't talk about quite as much, on 24 inches of rain year in, year out, his APH and crop insurance for his grain sorghum is 120. And that's because he's really dialed in what works in his environment. He actually thinks about planting his crop a little bit later. So he kind of shifts that more rain-sensitive time period, fertility period, into the first week of August. And he swears he gets a rain the first week of August. And I thought, I don't know, Dad. And then I went back and checked the weather, and Dad's kind of right about that. I get that as one example, but as I kind of look at a more landscape level, when I've used some geospatial satellite products and just looked at, okay, every field that's planted to sorghum in the United States, if I look at a 15-year time period, what are the fields and the corresponding crop rotations where I see an increase of sorghum planting? I want to understand, when we see sorghum planted more, what are the surrounding crop system factors that elicit that increase of sorghum? And the two highest or most prevalent areas where we see sorghum increased on a nationwide scale is, first, we see it increased by displacing fallow. So farms that may have had 2 summer fallows in a 3-year time period reduced to 1 summer fallow, or maybe perhaps displace summer fallow altogether. And so that's really speaking a lot to the crop of, there's confidence, and farmers have put those other practices into play. Maybe it's no-till, maybe it's maturities, your planting rate, those kind of items, to go ahead and intensify your summer growing season and plant a crop. That crop also, as you know, provides stover and is able to capture moisture and build up some organic matter in those highly water-limited systems. On the other side, the second most prevalent occurrence of sorghum increasing in the crop rotations is increasing with a double crop planting. And so that on my farm in northeast Kansas is where we use sorghum the most. So we'll put maybe a triticale or a wheat in, and as soon as that's pulled out, we'll pop right behind and we'll put sorghum in that rotation. And so just thinking about that double crop intensification that we see and how that can serve as being able to take the land that you manage and intensify, no matter if you have more rain abundant situations where I am, where sometimes we certainly have enough rainfall, but we might not get it in the week that we really need it to make the crop, or if you're in more water-limited environments where you'd have, fallow traditionally in your rotation. So that's what, as we think about what sorghum's done, a couple years ago I did a yield gap analysis. Yield gap is a strategy that's used across a number of crops to say, what is attainable in the genetics, what's attainable with the best farmer management, and then what's attainable with typical farmer management. And if you look in the most water-limited production regions that we have in the sorghum belt, we are seeing competitive genetic gain rates with other crops. Often we say, we're not having a lot of genetic gain, but if you concentrate to look at our most water-limited areas, production areas that have, right around, for every inch of rainfall that you're going to have a magnitude fold, a 0.4 ratio of your annual rainfall relative to your annual atmospheric water deficit. Those areas are seeing considerable genetic gain. I would say they're also seeing genetic gain under the typical conditions of intensive water limitation, which is you have a lot of variability year to year. And so we're seeing not just gains, but gains under a lot of unstable weather conditions. So as I look just kind of across the sorghum belt, sometimes we can get fixated on we haven't quite had the equivalent genetic gains for crops that are grown in probably easier environments, if we're honest. But we have had a lot of gains in how we intensify our crop systems, especially under some of the weather variability and volatility that we see on the plains.
When you talk about the big data sets, I have to giggle because your father, his data set of 30 years or 40 is probably just as valuable as that. And that's the difference and the uniqueness of our locations. And I would encourage anybody, I made a note, double crop. Might be hard where I'm at, but I'm going to check out the sorghum websites to find out what environments and check with Dr. Bean and the scientists to know if it'll work. Dr. Schnable, when you think about the future of sorghum breeding, because that's kind of big on your table, what traits do you think will be most important to be focused on?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think that today, if I asked any of you, do you want more yield or do you want a higher price? You would say you'd like a higher price. And when we think about sorghum, there really are opportunities in silage sorghum around increasing the digestibility. I think that's one of the main challenges if you think about a silage sorghum versus a silage corn. Similarly, if you think about sorghum for ethanol, there's work I'm doing with one of my colleagues, Andy Benson, in the food science, about harvesting valuable metabolites in the bran of sorghum, which can be a co-product coming out of an ethanol plant. And if you think about a lot of the economics of producing ethanol from sorghum, if a little bit of a valuable co-product, that really adds up in terms of the price you get at sale. So thinking about ways to make the price per bushel higher is something where I think there's been a lot less push. And one of the things we see with plant breeding is the longer you work at something, the harder it gets. Those linear increases in yield, the private sector is investing more and more money every year just to meet that same increase. But if there's an area where you haven't pushed in the past, and it's something that's going to give a lot of value, you can go really fast in those first couple of breeding cycles.
I love pushing. That's just a thing. And I was winking back at my ethanol people because I do think that that's kind of where sorghum has a fantastic opportunity to see some fast growth. And before I jump into some questions, so start thinking, everyone, we always ask you guys questions. I would like to know what you guys need our efforts to be. And, of course, money, plots. How would you stand up and say to this group, help me out? And let's start off with Dr. Sexton-Bowser.
The most powerful tool, especially when I work with teams, oftentimes there's scientists that have never thought about agriculture, but really could offer novel ideas and solutions outside the box. But what I need in those moments to best capitalize on their skill sets is clarity from you and regular feedback from you on what you need at the farm gate. And so whether it be engaging in leadership sorghum, whether it be on your Nebraska boards, on national sorghum boards, just being very active in the conversation and being very clear and helping dissect, what what value trait would actually work? What are you hearing from your end users? How would that work with various farm storage strategies, those kind of things? So help us understand not just the superficial idea, but the trade-offs relative to how you've optimized your farm today and what you would be able to do with new technologies to re-optimize your farm. So regular input and engagement conversations and honest clarity about what you need and how it would impact you, that's the greatest thing you can really contribute. It makes those conversations that we can have with various experts high-power conversations.
And the thing I worry about is, does what I say make sense or matter? And if I say to you, I can't get my sorghum to dry down, well, to her, she can turn that into a whole entire research study, and you'll be able to explain to others what that means. So we need to start really sharing what problems we're having producing it. I mean, we can all say it itches, but, you know, we're kind of done and over that. And we are breeding that out. I just want to make sure we get that in today. Please take that home with you. How would you stand up, and what would you ask for from us?
So I'm actually going to have a very similar answer. I'm just going to phrase it slightly differently, which is it's great if you can tell me what you need, but even if you don't know what you need, tell me what's frustrating you. Tell me what your problems are right now. I do this a lot working with students in my lab, new faculty. I say, you've got to believe farmers when they tell you what their actual problems are. And you've probably had this experience. Some new professor comes out here, and he or she, they've got a really great idea to solve a problem that you don't actually have. And that's just not going to be effective. On the other hand, if you tell me what the problem is, there may be a solution that wouldn't have occurred to you off in some other wing of the university, off somewhere else. And so just being able to articulate, look, this is a real problem growers are having. That helps me a lot, and that honestly helps me a lot more than money. So if you look at the funding for my program, about half of it is sorghum research, but it's not coming directly from growers. It's coming from you indirectly. Yeah. It's coming from the federal government. But what helps me is being able to say, look, this is a real need. This is it's articulated by the growers that there is a problem, and here is a solution that maybe nobody would have thought of. We've got this technology we can pull in from a completely different field, maybe outside of biology. That can solve it. So you don't have to know what you need. Just tell me what's frustrating you.
Boy, that should be easy. Did Director Miracle, did she mention that question? Would we tell you what's frustrating too? You hear it all the time. So an example would be variable head height. Well, there might be a research project going on that's already seen that, but if they didn't know from producers that is a frustration, they wouldn't care.
Right, and I can also talk to folks over in biological systems engineering. I mean, are there ways we can be, optimizing combines to be better able to deal with variable head height?
That's a good one. Dr. Bean, what would you stand up and say to us?
Well, certainly, agree with what they just said. Let us know what's a problem, what you're interested in, what we should be looking at. We very much want to know that. But turn that around a little bit in that when researchers at the universities or even with industry that are wanting to do studies, they need to be on your farm. And it's real easy to say, no, I don't have time for that. I'm busy. Let the other guy do it. Really encourage you to try to work with people that are wanting to do studies or do studies yourselves. If you want to know what's the best seeding rate for your particular situation, then I would encourage you to, maybe run some ideas by me or Nicholas or somebody, and then try it on your farm. Agronomy is local. It's nice to have a so-called expert like me come in and tell you what to do, but agronomy is local. And very seldom will I argue with a farmer if he says, I've been doing this and it works. Good. Sounds great.
Yeah, and ask more questions. An example of that would be Nicholas and I did some trials this past season, and I said to Dr. Bean what our populations were going to be, and he said, what? I thought you were doing dryland. And I had my dryland populations much higher than he would have anticipated. So I did some rethinking. I've learned some things through the trial, but I think that's number one for all of us, is that it is kind of a pain. It is extra time, but it matters. And it matters to the people that are working for us away from the farm. And so I encourage everyone, take your turn, get the bug, different bugs, but find out what works on your farm and then be willing to share it. We've reached the time where I know there's burning questions. And I want to check outside and look and see. I see Tyler back there. I know he's got some. He doesn't want to monopolize, but do you have one for us?
Sure. You want to name off the top 3 maybe herbicides that guys up here could use that would be good for broadleaf grasses, like top 3 what you have for during season?
Is that directed probably at Dr. Bean, or have you guys done some different
That sounds like
work?
a UNL trained scientist.
There
question.
you go.
Yeah, the top 3. I mean, no surprise here. You said in season, so I assume you mean post-emergence?
Yep.
Yeah, there's some very good products to use pre-emergence. Post-emergence, yeah, the choices are much more slim. Certainly from a broadleaf weed control, I mean, Husky is typically a pretty good product. Unfortunately, there's some resistance to Husky. Either it works great or it just doesn't work at all. There's not a whole lot in between, but that is certainly one that I would look at. You do need to get it, onto the weeds when they're relatively small, which is the case with all of them. That would probably be usually my number one go-to. I like a pre-mix if you're not using that, not a pre-mix, but a mix that you do yourself, but maybe Buctril, a little bit of dicamba, like 4 ounces, 2 to 4 ounces, so not enough to damage the crop, plus atrazine, I think, is a pretty good post-emergence treatment. So those would probably be my top 2. Once you get to number 3, talk about the grass, I guess. From a grass standpoint, if you truly have a grass issue, we do have new technologies now where you can use good grass herbicides. And mostly you're going to be familiar with the herbicide Assure that's used in soybeans. You can now use that in sorghum if you use what's called a double team sorghum that's tolerant to that hybrid, very effective on grasses. Enzen Pioneer has a product, Nicosulfuron, that you're familiar with as Accent that was used in corn. Can also be very effective on grasses that you might have. And then there's another product, Imazamox, that's used in soybeans that you can actually use. So there are some good products from a grass control standpoint. Now, I will tell you those hybrids are probably not quite as good as what's out there without that trait right now, but they are getting better. But if you've got a serious grass problem, your yield drag associated with that grass is going to be big enough that you can justify using those hybrids and those herbicides. So,
Thank you, Dr. Bean. I think my agronomist first told me, if you have a grass problem, don't plant milo. And we have some tools now with some of that we can use. Most of the agronomists I talk to in my part of the world, because we have a lot of resistant weeds, say, if you don't use pre, don't call me. And so I put a pre down with everything, and that's about everything. Even when they're not there. The hard part with dryland is if you don't get rain, it's not incorporated. If you don't get enough rain, there's always something. Who asked for frustrations? Was that me?
That was me.
Some other questions that have come up. Yes, sir.
So there was a comment about IDC. I'm going to ask this, is probably forward related because you have the difference in the BMR in there versus the conventional.
Yeah.
Have you guys noticed, is there any difference in how a BMR handles iron chlorosis versus a straight conventional type?
Dr. Schnable.
I'm not sure if I have made up that in my mind or if somebody told me that once, that there's different metabolism mechanism that happens.
Yeah, so the project at this point has been focused or dedicated on looking at grain types. But mechanisms for IDC escape can be improved iron uptake, so maybe some of that root function that you have improved. It can be improved iron efficiency, or it can be just general hybrid vigor of you get out of that early growth stage and you kind of grind through it a bit quicker. And I would hypothesize that BMR, maybe if you're seeing impacts, would be impacting that overall growth and development and maybe that metabolism. It's not something we've tested. It certainly would be interesting to test. Thanks for that. This is the feedback, right? Because sometimes the feedback creates questions that would not have been asked that are very useful.
For some of us, what is BMR?
BMR is brown midrib, and so it changes the lignin within the plant and makes it more available to the ruminant.
Darn acronyms. Doc, did you have anything else to add on that with that? It's a good question. Thank you. Keep them coming. Yes, sir.
On the iron chlorosis and other things, if you looked at sulfur to improve the plant health and fend off some of that, what are you seeing?
On this project, we are looking exclusively at soil conditions that elicit the IDC symptoms so we can identify genetics. So we've used a couple different strategies to put together genetics where we went through and we looked at kind of where sorghum has evolved from, what are the toughest soils, either high pH or calcareous soils that we would predict would elicit genetics that would have greater tolerance. And then we've also looked in other crops. Where are those genetic controls that they know, and do we have any analogs in sorghum? So we've put together a panel, and we are only looking at stress conditions. And it really is translating. We have a controlled environment, so a cotton ball method where we'll screen materials initially, and then we use that as a candidate because seeing something perform in the greenhouse is not equivalent to seeing something perform in the field. We see a lot of interactions with early season temperature, water stress in the season, all of those growth and development mechanisms. And so we use microplots and high replication with controls in the field to be able to calibrate and evaluate genetics that are consistently rising above the stress in the field. On the micronutrients, I know there's a number of farmers that have high IDC conditions. I think about Jeff Zortman, and he spoke to how he's done some chelates and some other foliar products where he's seen better response on that. But our project is explicitly looking at genetics, and Dr. Bean really made a keen point. Sorghum is uniquely susceptible. So we know that plants have diversity for this. And so we just, our prediction is that sorghum had a loss of function because we started to plant and develop the crop in areas where you didn't have the stress pressure, and so you just didn't continue to select for it. And so we're going back to find that lost treasure of that function that will allow us to perform equivalent to other crops and escape the stress.
To directly kind of answer your question on the sulfur, I mean, from what I've seen with studies that have been done with that, sulfur might, if it's put down there, very close to the seed, may have a very temporary benefit because it's lowering that pH, but it certainly doesn't last long, and from what I've seen, really doesn't make as much difference as you would think it might. There's certainly these chelates and other products that people have tried with mixed results. That's actually a study that I would like to see somebody do, in a good replicated study, looking at some of these newer products for that. So if anybody, wants to raise their hand and say, I want to do a study, well, let me know. But
ask and you shall receive.
yeah, yes.
Nicholas and I, let's add it to our plot. We use a product called Soy Green on our soybeans. And we've been last few years, we put it in furrow. And it reduced yield, but I have a plant through the whole season and it keeps canopy. So I think we've got something we can try there. So did you have anything more to add on the sulfur with that? Dr. Schnable, tell me what you see as the outlook for sorghum.
I'm very pessimistic about the world, which means I'm very optimistic about sorghum.
I like that.
You look at water availability trends all through this region. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more sorghum. If you look at upcoming policy and what that's going to mean for the demand for ethanol, either directly or through alcohol to jet pipelines, there's going to be a lot more demand, and there is a lot of infrastructure for producing ethanol all through western Nebraska, western Kansas, eastern Colorado, and I don't think that there is the corn production to meet that demand. So I'm very optimistic about sorghum prices, less optimistic about a lot of the other things.
Well, I just feel good right now. I'm just going to pause. I'm a little down on the world, but I'm optimistic about sorghum. I'm walking through the day with that. Any questions? Yes, sir. One more, please.
Dr. Bean, you sent out a really nice piece yesterday.
Yes, that was good.
About nitrogen pricing and management. And so maybe could you give the group just a little snippet since we do have some change in the nitrogen price and inputs are a big challenge. How can we best manage that or some options to manage that nitrogen application throughout the season to give us fantastic crop, better nitrogen use efficiency, I would say, and watch that price per acre just a touch if that's a
And he's referring to a newsletter that Dr. Bean sends out, and I would highly encourage everyone to get on it. It's a great question.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and that is posted on our. No, it's not. Not on our. It's not posted on our website, but there's something else that's somewhat similar to it. But yeah, I do reference some things on our website in that article. But yeah, what was basically saying was, as you guys know, nitrogen prices have really jumped up over the last couple of weeks. Are they going to remain that high? I have no idea. But what this article was really talking about that I wrote had to do with how sorghum can more efficiently use nitrogen, and compared to other crops, it just has that big fibrous root system, so it can take up nitrogen a little better than maybe some of the other crops can, just because of its root system. So there's an advantage there. But a really good study was done at Oklahoma State here 4 or 5 years ago, where they were looking at applying all your nitrogen on pre-plant versus applying it all on post. And they had anywhere from, like, I don't remember the exact days, but 20, 28, 35, 40, 56, and on days after planting on putting nitrogen on. Well, historically, we've always thought that, the way that the growth and development of sorghum works, that you better have most of your nitrogen on within 30 days or so after emergence. What this research showed is that you actually can delay that probably up to 50, 55 days and still get a very strong response from nitrogen. Now, you may have a little bit of delaying in maturity of that sorghum, but you can still utilize that nitrogen. So why is that important? Well, if you can delay your nitrogen application from applying it pre-plant, you have a much, much better idea what that yield potential of your sorghum is. So instead of putting on maybe 100 pounds of N or whatever it is, maybe you only need 60 pounds. Okay, so there's you some savings right there on nitrogen. So yeah.
If it even came out of the ground.
But
If it even comes out of the ground.
Yeah, and one thing
moisture.
and one thing I would certainly do from a sorghum standpoint is, or any crop, I mean, I don't think you want to put all your basket in that post-emergence application. I would at least put some on as a starter to get that crop up and going good and quickly. I think that's pretty important too. But I would strongly think about putting at least 75% of my nitrogen on post-emergence in an environment we're in right now when nitrogen prices are so high.
And did they do that foliar? I would worry about burn, or was it?
No, it wasn't foliar. They were, and I had to go back and look at the paper,
Okay.
but they were putting it in the soil.
In the soil. That was okay.
Yeah, and he's done some work on that also. You need to put it injected in the soil. A lot of his work has shown not necessarily just doing a surface drip will work just about as good as actually physically putting it into the soil a couple inches.
Kind of knifing it in. While you have your mic up there, tell us your outlook for sorghum for the coming.
For sorghum acres, or
I'd love to hear that. Yes, do that.
yeah, who knows? I mean, if we remain dry, then I think sorghum acres are going to probably go up some. I think a lot of people are waiting as late as they can to make that decision this year on what they're going to plant. Sorghum, just because of the input cost, and I go into that a little bit in that article too. The input cost on sorghum is just so much lower than the other crops, and it really starts with just seed cost. But it's just a lot less costly to grow a sorghum crop than others, yet sorghum can be very opportunistic. That was in an article that was in High Plains Journal just a couple of days ago. But if you do get rains, it can respond to that and do well. So when we have these, what looks like going to be a dry year, usually those sorghum acres do go up. And thanks to good work from the NSP and others in getting boats of sorghum being sold to China and other places is going to make a big difference at some point in that basis.
Yeah.
It's already helped some. Zach Simon could probably comment on that better than I do because he keeps up with that more than I do. But the price is beginning to inch up, and hopefully before long, because we are truly selling some sorghum now, we'll see that that basis get improved.
Yep, and great. And I think what I'd encourage everyone is to get some sorghum in your rotation so that you can learn how it works on your operation before you get into a scenario where it's so dry that it's the only crop that has a chance on your operation. You want to be ahead of the game, not behind. So I think we've got time for one more. So tell us your outlook on sorghum acres, research, industry.
I'll break it into two pieces. On acres, just to reiterate and reframe, sorghum within the farmer toolbox is a risk management tool. That's really the workhorse that you expect of sorghum. This is a year where risk management is a smart and leading criteria on how you design what you're going to be planting, how you're going to be managing. So I see, farmers looking and leaning on that tool and probably doing that pretty near term to when you start pulling the planter out of the machine shed and making those decisions. Then in sorghum, kind of in a broader scale, where do I see it? Dr. Schnable made a great point on gains. Those higher level gains take a lot more investment. You have incremental returns once you've maximized everything. Sorghum has just a ton of low-hanging fruit, whether it's from market development, whether it's from end use, novel gains, and then certainly on the seed and seed genetics alongside, what are the management and agronomy components of that? And so just thinking about all of the untapped, unexploited opportunity within the crop, we certainly have a lot of easy buttons yet to push, and with prioritization, going back to your voice as farmer leaders, prioritization of what are the strategies that you want to be explored first on those low-hanging fruit opportunities to continue to pursue improvement within the crop.
Thank you. Thank you all. I just can't express how much we benefit as an industry from people like you devoting your lives to this and sharing with us and taking time. And for all of us, please take some time today to thank them, to tell them your frustrations or your questions, and stay in touch with them through email, through the websites, through their research practices. So we thank you all, and I just now noticed, that's a good-looking group of people up there. Let's give them a hand for their time here today.